In this tutorial, I plan to cover why parenting and pivot offset are the two keystones to CraftStudio modeling. With parenting, I can have an arm on this character. Moving the upper arm is centered around the shoulder because that's where the pivot offset is. The lower arm also moves relative to the upper arm. I'll create a new model to demonstrate how to have a block parent another. But first I have one quick side note. I need to clarify something from my previous tutorial. Note this small discrepancy between the two blocks. Now notice that if I attempt to move one of the blocks to get them to line up properly, I can't. The reason for this is one of the blocks has a width of an even number, while the other has a width of an odd number. Now that may sound sort of arbitrary, but it actually makes perfect sense. Say you have a block with 4 as one of its dimensions, but you expand it to 5. Since it expands in both directions, totaling up to 5, it actually is expanding in 0.5 in either direction. But because position is based on the same grid, it no longer lines up with the grid properly, meaning that other things that do line up to the grid will not line up to it. Henceforth, the problem. It isn't necessarily a problem, you can use this to your advantage. However, the effect that it produces can be reproduced with stretch. It could also technically be fixed with stretch, until you get to texturing, and then it just screws it up again. Back to the main subject, parenting. Pick which block you want to be parented, and click and drag it onto the block you want to be its parent. It's that simple. If you attempt to manipulate the parented block, it won't appear to have made any difference. But if you attempt to manipulate the parenting block, the child block will act as if it has been manipulated in the same way. Note that this only applies to position and orientation. Block size, pivot offset, and stretch are all independent to that block. Take note of the fact that if you manipulate the parent block, the data for the parented block does not change. No matter how drastically I change block 1's orientation, block 2 will continue to have 0, 0, 0. This also applies to position. You should know how to use pivot offset, but I haven't really showed how to apply pivot offset. And truth be told, it's kind of difficult to explain. Generally, you'll want the child's pivot offset to be connected to its parent. For example, a shoulder has a pivot offset that's connected to the torso. Let's add a couple more blocks to demonstrate. Now I have a simple model with a complete hierarchy. I suggest you build a model like this yourself. That way you can experiment with which block should be the overall parenting block. Once you're done experimenting, let's create a new model to apply these concepts. Name your blocks in a way that makes sense to you. That said, avoid naming two blocks the same thing, unless you want them to do the same thing in animation. Tutorial 1.4 will cover this. Note that I'm using duplicate block instead of creating a new block. This is because the approximate dimensions that I want are already present in this current block. I could have created a new block, but this method saves more time. I know I want my model to be symmetrical. I can save time with using the Duplicate Model Node button, selecting Mirror Along X, and ensuring that Duplicate Descendants 2 is checked off. With my naming scheme, all I need to do is rename the R to an L. However, once my duplication is complete, the descendants have not been renamed, so I have to rename them manually. And there we are. As promised, a mustache. I have the parenting set up such that the base, the middle piece of the mustache, is parenting all of the other pieces of the mustache. Another important thing to note is there is no undo button in CraftStudio. You can save revisions and go back to them, or you can just rely on memory. You should be able to use this tutorial and the previous one in building a few models of your own. If you have any questions, suggestions, or anything, really, please write it down in the comments below.